I think we can go ahead and start now. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Lori Gaventer, and I'm a program manager at the Brown University School of Professional Studies. We are thrilled that you've chosen to participate in this masterclass on strategic agility, Master the 5 Keys to Strategize and Lead. At the School of Professional Studies, we hope to be your partner in overcoming your leadership challenges now and in the future. Oh, I'm having a problem here with my screen. Sorry about that. So the School of Professional Studies is one of Brown University's 4 schools, in addition to the graduate school and the undergraduate college. With its origins dating back 3 decades, it was established with the purpose of enhancing the university's impact in the world by reaching new communities of learners at all career stages through distinctive degree and non-degree programs aligned with Brown's academic strengths. We offer a variety of programs tailored to your career stage, whether you're just starting, mid-career, or at a senior level. We have professional degree programs in healthcare leadership, technology leadership, and the top-ranked IE Brown Executive MBA. We also offer more than 30 early career master's programs spanning leadership, sustainability, healthcare, coaching, and applied AI and data science. We offer non-degree executive education and professional certificates, and we also custom design programs for organizations. Our delivery formats include online, in-person, and asynchronous options to fit your lifestyle. And now I'd like to get to our program for today. But first, a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. We have 1 hour together today, with most of our time devoted to the content of our session, followed by about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of our session available for Q&A. If you would please use the Q&A link at the bottom of the screen to post your questions at any time, I'll be watching for them. But please put your questions into the Q&A. There's also a chat feature, but that's for your use during the session as well to post comments or respond to any questions from the speaker. And now I'm excited to introduce our special guest. I'm delighted to introduce Baba Prasad, who is Professor of the Practice and Leadership at the School of Professional Studies. Baba is an expert in the fields of strategic management, innovation, and leadership. He has a rich academic and professional background and brings decades of experience in management and technology to his position. He began his career in electrical engineering and AI in India before transitioning to cloud computing at JP Morgan, where he explored emerging technologies. He has taught at several business schools in the United States and India, including Purdue and the University of Minnesota, and has consulted for various global organizations. He has a background in robotics, artificial intelligence and management, and has degrees from the Indian Institute of Science, University of Hyderabad, Kansas State University, and the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. His book, Nimble, Make Yourself and Your Company Resilient in the Age of Constant Change, sets out his framework for agile leadership and organizational agility, which he'll be discussing with you today. Without further ado, here's Baba.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a bright and cold day here in Providence, and wherever you are, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Okay? We have about 45 minutes together for my talk and question and answers. So I hope to make the best use of it. Basically, I'm going to tell you some stories, which I hope will give you a new way of thinking about strategy and about leadership. Okay? So I see a lot of people out there from Minnesota, and that's a very dear state to me because most of this research was started when I was in the faculty at the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. And of course, it has progressed much beyond what I did there, but Minnesota still remains very close to my heart. Okay. So here, let me start off by sharing my screen and giving you my presentation, if I can find it. Yes, there we go. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about strategic agility. And in some sense, this is a kind of a funny problem because strategy is all about looking forward and looking into the future, and agility is all about responding to the present. And how do you make these two connect is a big challenge. And as we'll see, this has plagued many companies, and people have been struggling with this throughout corporate history. Okay? To take this forward, okay? So this is not to convince you, you're all convinced about this. We have tremendous amounts of uncertainty in the world, tremendous amount of, turbulence that's going on here. And these come from various sources, from technologies changing, from competition, from globalization, government regulation, of which we're seeing a lot today, unpredictable customers. They bring expectations from across the world, cultural expectations, maybe technological expectations that, that they carry from one market to another. And of course, inside the organization, there's all kinds of stuff happening. Employees don't want to stay in your position, so in your company. So then how do you deal with that attrition? What about labor migration, people moving from one place to another? And also, of course, the political instability of everything, because that's connected to the government regulation. So it's not, I mean, I don't need to convince you about the impact of change today. And the impact is not just about the sources, but also the kind of impact that we will have. Okay. Where you see just a couple of weeks ago, DeepSeek was a huge disruption. $1 trillion erased from the US stock market. Of course, it recovered a bit more later, but then this is the kind of impact that it has. And so the shock of this, and it's not restricted to one industry. Just because the same thing happened in this happened in AI industry, the same kind of thing is happening in the drug industry. So now it's having its DeepSeek moment. So just on Friday, there was this article out in Wall Street Journal where Chinese biotechs are developing drugs faster and cheaper. So, being more quick, more ready to go to the market and with better products. This is like a constant thing that's happening. So how do you deal with this? This is the problem of strategy. So as you look forward, you're looking into the distance, and I love this cartoon from Diary of the Wimpy Kid, where you see this guy looking out into the distance with through binoculars, and actually the branch is going to hit him right now. And the duck is actually a pun there. So the guy is looking for ducks, and this guy is yelling him to duck. So this is the kind of conundrum that we have in strategy. That we can't look, we have to look very far, but we have to again also be agile in the present. So how do you develop this kind of flexibility is a big debate. Okay. And we often used to think size is a big problem. Size is a big asset that we could actually overcome change with size. And history has proved over and over again that this is not true. Because if we look at this, I mean, I have two stories here of the multiple kinds of failures that has happened. Digital Equipment Corporation, commonly called DEC, used to be the second biggest computer company in the world in 1990. It operated in 40 countries across the world. And in 1993, by 1993, it's collapsed. Why? Because it couldn't cope with desktop computing, Unix workstations and PCs coming in, and they didn't just anticipate that. And of course, we have a bunch of other companies like that, Kodak, Polaroid. You'll have a long list of these huge companies that are collapsing, dinosaurs virtually, that can't cope with the change that's coming there. General Electric, another iconic company, established in 1892 by none other than Edison. Market capitalization in 2000 is $410 billion. And then the banking crisis happens where GE is overextended with GE Finance, and is not able to cope, and also doesn't let go of its failing assets, begins to decline. And by 2024, just last year, it broke off into 3 companies and sold off many of its businesses. So you see this, size doesn't matter. So what matters then? How do you cope with this turbulence if size doesn't matter, right? Then the answer comes that you're actually talking about something called nimbleness. And I use the word nimbleness because I want to tear it away from the methodology that you've all heard in software called agile methodology. So agile is something for me that's trapped in software. So while I would call it agility, it doesn't really go as agile. So here are 2 quotes. Okay. Warren Bennis, famous professor of leadership who was at USC, University of Southern California. After 50 or 50 odd years, he's just died recently, but 50 odd years after of his research later, he writes this one sentence. The one competence that I now realize is absolutely essential for leaders, the key competence, is adaptive capacity. And what is that adaptive capacity? Adaptive capacity is that which allows leaders to respond quickly and intelligently to relentless change. So what this is saying is that in this age of turbulence, leaders need to be very agile. Now, on the flip side, here's Lord John Brown, who was a former CEO of British Petroleum, and he's talking about strategy. He says, all you can do is give yourself the capacity to respond to the only certainty in life, which is uncertainty. And the creation of that capability is the purpose of strategy. So we see two sides of the same coin. One side is leadership, and the other side is, strategy. And the question is then, we can't have agile companies, we can't have, nimble companies without agile leadership, and we cannot have agile strategy without agile leadership. So both ways it works that way. Yeah. So what this tells us is that we need to shift our thinking, our paradigm about leadership and strategy in terms of nimbleness. So one thing that tells us, one thing that comes out at us is that nimble leadership and nimble strategy are intertwined. Till now, most corporate environments look at leaderships differently, and so leadership training is always in human resources, and nimble strategy or strategy is within the corporate enterprise. So it's mostly the board and the CEO's group that's doing strategy. And of course, we have all kinds of problems with execution because the boardroom conceptualizes the strategy and it never goes down to the worker level, where the front line, where actually you need to be implementing that strategy. So that's one thing that's jumping out at us, that leadership and strategy cannot be separated if you want to be nimble. Okay? The second thing, and this is a very ingrained idea from a very, very long time, that we also in management schools have been teaching people, that we can actually predict the future using probabilities. And this is very much like driving, look in the rear view mirror, because that's the way we predict or think about probability, right? So the last few times this has happened, so the next time again it will happen. And that's absolutely the wrong way to think about turbulence in a world of turbulence. So what do? We say, okay, the path forward is going to be like the path behind that we just left. And then we say, this is a change that we're going to see, probabilistically thinking. And these are the actions that we need to take to meet that future. And obviously, that's not going to work because the future is going to be very different. So what about this? What do we need to do differently here? So this is what nimbleness is telling us, is that you have to develop capabilities that can allow you to handle an unknown, unfolding future. Forget trying to predict the future. Think about what capabilities you will need to handle a multiple range of futures. And these capabilities are what we call agilities. Now, why do I call this in the plural? We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I want to tell you another story here about why this is a plural, okay, why I'm thinking of agilities as a plural and not just agile or agility. Okay. Here's an example, and I think it'll be a guessing game for you guys, for those of you who know it. If not, I'll tell you on the next slide. There's a fire in a semiconductor factory that's based in New Mexico. Two major manufacturers depend on the chips that are made here. Okay? And they're very, very key to their products. The chips made here in this firm, in this company, are very, very critical. Now the fire has actually destroyed the chip making capability. And not only that, it has also destroyed the supply right now. So there are the two different companies, let's call them company A and company B. They have different responses. Company A goes out, and although the factory is saying that we will be up in 6 weeks, so just plan for a 6-week supply chain. It looks at its supply chain and says, okay, we have 2 months, but let's be careful. And what they do is they go and harness the chips from every market, especially South Asia. All the chip equivalents that are available, it just gathers all the chips, and there's nothing more left in the market. Company B, on the other hand, relies on the factory's assurances that the factory says will be up in 2 months, and that turns out to be false. It turns out to be 4 months, 6 months, and then what happens is that it continually starts to lose market share because company A is actually selling the product and company B doesn't have anything to sell. Result, company A survives because it is agile, and company B does not. So if you have not guessed this so far, this is Nokia and Ericsson. Okay. Nokia was the agile company and Ericsson was the non-agile company. So much so that it had to sell itself off to Sony and it became Sony Ericsson. It had to sell the handset division off to Sony and it became Sony Ericsson. Okay, great. So agile companies are great. Is that the true thing? Well, Nokia was very, very operationally agile. It managed its supply chain so well, but that didn't serve it well. Because look at this. 2009, the global market share for Nokia was 34%. China, it had 35%, India, 54%, and USA, it had 7% of the market. Okay, this is the market share. And in 2012, 3 years later, global market share is 16%, dropped from 34. China percentage 35 to 4. India halved, 54 to 27, and China 1/7. So what happened? The iPhone was introduced, and Nokia was not able to be agile. So iPhone was introduced, Android came in, and so within a few years, because it didn't move from Symbian OS, it didn't move from its brick phone. So all those things, lots of inagilities made it become defunct. So in fact, so much so that in 2013, it had to sell itself off to Microsoft, the phone division at least. So this is a classic case of how one kind of agility is not enough. There needs to be multiple kinds of agilities. And so this is alerting us to some kind of issue here. I want to give you a problem to drive home this, this particular point. And you can answer in the chat here. I'm interested more in the process of how you would answer this than the exact answer. I don't need a kilometers or a miles answer. I need the process. How would you find the distance from your home to your favorite movie theater? Okay, great. So I see a lot of responses here. And most of them are saying that you would use Google or Waze or Apple Maps to find us. Okay, that's great. But let me show you that there are different ways of solving this thing. Yeah. You could use a math formula or Google Maps, right? You could even compute, saying, okay, it takes me 5 minutes to drive and I drive at 30 miles per hour. So, I could use the math formula to calculate that. I could drive there and see the odometer reading, right? I could actually find an equivalent place and use that distance. So in some sense, I can say, I don't know the distance to the movie theater, but I know the distance to the market, which is on the other side. And so it must be the same. So I find that distance and plug it in here. Or fourth one could be say, hey, no, somebody here should know it. And so I ask that somebody, and that somebody tells me the answer. So all four responses are equally valid, and all four responses can give you the right answer. There's no one solution that's better than the other. What makes it better is what kind of inclination and strength you have. So are you inclined more to use Google Maps than to ask somebody? Or do you have the strength to actually drive there? Do you have the ability to drive there and see the odometer? And that's one thing. So the strength and the inclination that you have. And the second thing is context. And I think this is one of the big missing pieces in strategy, that we don't think about context. We seem to think that strategy can be applied irrespective of context, and it's very important for us to think about context. What kind of response is required for what kind of context? Now, why do I say this here? If you think about this, these are four different kinds of agilities. Okay. Using the math formula or Google Maps is a kind of an analytical agility. Driving there and seeing the odometer is more practical. That's an operational agility. Inventive is where you see you find some solution in some other domain and apply that here. And this is classic inventions have come in history. You can see that in all through history that we see, for instance, the invention of the printing press by Gutenberg. He was working in a mint and he saw the that you could actually stamp stuff with something that's embossed there. And he also was he was watching the organ go up in his church, go up and down the organ pipes. And he came up with this conception of something going and striking on paper, and the printing press was invented, right? So this is a common thing that happens, that you take solutions from another domain and apply it here. So that's an inventive kind of intelligence or inventive agility. And fourth one is communicative. These are four different kinds of agilities that you can think about. And so what did Nokia do? Nokia was very strong in the operational agility, but then it wasn't able to analyze what would happen when the iPhone came. It wasn't able to invent a touchscreen phone quickly enough. And so these kinds of things that it didn't have, made it go bankrupt. So this is a critical thing for us to think, that we want to be able to think about different kinds of agilities that might be needed for different kinds of situations and different kinds of settings. So what are these agilities? Let us talk a little bit more about this and why I call them 5 different agilities. The first one is analytical agility. Now, analytical agility is not just about being analytical. It is about being flexible analytically. Okay, so if I'm doing one kind of analysis in my company and I need a different one, am I able to shift from one to another? Okay. A classic case is an accounting firm or a tax firm. The tax rules change. Are you able to shift your kind of analysis? And another kind of example would be companies that invest in software. Um, it's a different kind of capital investment in software, because most of the costs are borne upfront, and then the running costs are very low. So it needs a different kind of thinking than from a manufacturing kind of setup. So are you able to, in a budget, justify in a different way when necessary? That's analytical agility. Operational agility needs to be said about that. It's just about doing things in different ways. So for instance, a machine breaks down. Is the factory capable of doing this in a different way? Supply chain suddenly demands, there's a new demand, and is the supply chain capable of handling that, catering to that new demand? That's operational agility. Inventive agility, as I said just now, is the ability to create new products and processes responding to market demands, or maybe to new technologies that have come up. Can we explore that and use inventive agility? And communicative agility is something that you often associate with emotional intelligence, where you're able to collaborate and persuade using different kinds of techniques. So for instance, just think of an email that you would need to write to different audiences. And you will need to use different kinds of words and different persuasive techniques to handle that. Now, all these are fine, the analytical, operational, inventive, and communicative. What they allow us to do is to respond quickly to something. But in my research, it's what I've been finding is that it's not enough to be reactive. All the 4 agilities that I talked about till now, analytical, operational, inventive, and communicative, give you the ability to be reactive. But you need to think about what that reaction will cause down the road. Okay? I might be able to stop something right now, but then it might actually be debilitating for me down the road. So thinking beyond the here and now, you need a different kind of agility that comes and tempers what we're doing right now, thinking about the long term, and thinking also about the goodness of the company in some sense. Okay? And those of you who have read Jim Collins' Built to Last will know that there's a lot of movement, a movement in the industry today to think about principled companies. One of the core goals of business is to do good in the world. While serving yourself, you also are there to be facilitating and providing services or products for the good of the world. So thinking beyond me and company, not just being locked up in a me and the company kind of framework, is visionary agility. It makes you think about the long-term impacts of all these responses that you're developing with these four other agilities. So this is, I think, is a very, very important thing for us to understand. Okay? And I won't, of course, get into the issues of how we do this. That's a much, we will do more master classes on those when we talk about each of these agilities and think about how we develop them, how we apply them. I want to give you a case study to show how these agilities actually work in practice. And the story is of a fast fashion company called Zara, of course, with which many of you might be familiar. And here's a kind of response that Zara does. Here's 2015. Zara stores in Tokyo, Toronto, San Francisco, and Frankfurt report a demand for pink scarves. Okay. And 7 days later, Zara has 500,000 pink scarves ready for sale in 2,000 Zara stores. And the entire stock gets sold out in 3 days. This is response, rapid response, sense and respond. Sense a market and cater to that, and obviously make a huge profit in the meantime. Okay. Now, how does it do it? So here's the operational model, the business model. Zara works in 96 countries. It has about 2,300 stores. And here's the core business model. As you can see, the customer is at the center of the model. And the customer goes into the stores, buys stores. So it's not, it used to be not very online. It was always physical, and the entire store was got up in a way as if it was a billboard. So if you're crossing malls, especially in India or in the US, you'll see this huge billboard like Zara sign, which attracts customers. So they go into the stores, and then from the stores, the feedback goes to design. Design makes the new, decides what to make and makes new designs. And that goes to manufacturing. Manufacturing then goes to shipping, logistics, and that the clothes are available in the store. So this is a basic, the model in which Zara operates. But here's how it actually works. Yeah. Every morning and evening, store managers talk to the store representatives. They're on the floor. Yeah. And they ask questions like, what sold today? What did people ask that we didn't have today? And these kinds of things are fed into the computer at the end of the day. The store manager feeds this. So imagine all this data coming from 2,300 stores across the world into this particular central database. So this is big data. Now the data is analyzed. Okay? And once the data is analyzed, there are three teams that work on this analyzed data. Okay? Commercial teams, the design team, and the production team. And they select from this, based on this data analysis, they select which designs to make. Okay. So now these two, now I've got these things in parentheses right there because I'm talking about which kind of agility is being used in this. The store management assessments are communicative agility. The data analysis that's done by computers is analytical agility. And then the decisions that the teams make about which designs to make, again, that's analytical agility. Now this goes next to the creative team. So there are 300 in-house designers with three groups, catering to men, women, and children designs. And they have actually, very interestingly, in a time when you're actually cutting down people, the focus is on cutting down employment, they have 40% excess capacity. And that's where they build their agility. That if something, some sudden demand surges, then they're able to cater and produce that design. And moreover, these three groups, men, women, and children designers, are interchangeable. So men can move over into women design, men designers can move over into women designers, and so forth. So this is inventive agility. But the essence, the core essence, is their operational agility. So this is how it works. That stores place orders 2 times a week. And they've found out through research that before and after the weekend is the best time for them to place the orders. And the Zara stores receive supplies 2 times a week. Now, they also, unlike other companies that make huge, like, many of the other companies like Gap, etc., would make 200, 300,000 pieces in one batch. These guys will produce only 8,000 to 80,000. And their goal is from design concept to the time it gets to store, it's only 3 weeks, whereas the major apparel manufacturers are locking up for months. Okay, so these guys will work only for 3 weeks, and much production happens in Spain. Now they've established small factories in Bangladesh, Morocco, Turkey, and China, but most of the production is still in Spain. That allows them centralized control. And the stores are, quite a few of the stores are in Spain and China, and they're expanding into e-commerce. So this is the operational kind of agility that they have. As a result, what happens? Now I've not talked about the visionary agility. So now we've talked about analytical, operational, inventive, and communicative agilities. Where is the visionary agility coming in? And that's when they start to think that the visionary agility for Zara is that workers are at the center of their business. Okay. So everything is focused on women empowerment within the workers who are working in the company, responsible purchasing practices, living wages, worker participation, occupational health and safety. So they make the worker the center because they realize that this is the actual core of their practice, of their business, that the workers who produce these things very quickly are able to analyze and design and sell stuff, logistics, all the stuff. So the workers are at the center. So with the focus on this, what happens is that their strategic plan, for instance, is based on the workers being at the center. So they have visionary agility. So these 5 agilities are all together brought to bear in Zara's practice. And as a result, what happens? You see this, and this is a little dated, the stock market price, but they're still continuing to be the same. And there are some Chinese, especially after the COVID, some Chinese online retailers have been, threatening. Inditex is the Zara's parent company. That's how it appears on stock market. They have been threatening them, and I'm interestedly looking at how Zara will respond to that threat. Okay, so you see Inditex right there up there. H&M, which is the next competitor, is this around here, and Gap, which is here, is very, very low down. So many US companies are out there. So they're trying to develop this, and actually Kohl's is doing well on that. They're trying to copy some of Zara's methodology and see by 2018 they're actually trying to they've come up from being negative to being positive, okay, and close to Zara. Okay, so this is a story of how Zara is actually working. So how do you implement this agility strategy? How do you bring this into your company? This is a question that comes up. Okay, and there are 4 steps that we will need to bring in to bring this into the organization. First is what we call mapping, and this is a cycle. And the cycle's frequency happens depending on what kind of turbulent market you are in. How frequently you'll have to run through this cycle depends on the turbulence in the market. So the first step is to map and look out at the world and say, to succeed in this particular world of business or in this particular environment, what kinds of agilities do we need? Do we need more of operational agility? Do we need more of analytical agility? Which ones do we need? So that's the mapping part. Then the second part is assessing and looking internally. What do we already have and what do we need to develop? How do we need to close the gap? Okay. So this is where the strategizing happens. So the next step is the strategizing. So here are strengths and here are weaknesses. How do we leverage our strengths and how do we overcome the weaknesses? Okay, so that's the strategizing part. Now we're in a very fast changing world. So what happens? What we've developed a strategy may not work. So what do? We go out into the world and test it without running up huge bills by investing wholesale in the strategy. We do a test. And if that strategy is working, then we kind of put more money and more resources into that strategy. So we go through these 4 different strategies through the cycle. So these are the 4 steps in the cycle. This is what we call the MAST cycle. Now, I want to dwell on 2 aspects of this assessment. So assessment, we have metrics that we have tools that we can deploy. I'm not going to go into that in this session because we're very short of time. But basically, we can assess people for their agilities as individuals or as teams, and that contributes to what we call leadership agility. So we can again get a kind of a figure for how agile is this leader? In what kinds of ways is this person agile? Where does this person need to develop agility? Those kinds of questions can be answered by that first metric. And then the second one is the organization, where we look at processes and we actually study processes. Where is the organizational structure rigid? Is the organizational communication processes, are they rigid? How flexible are they? Is reporting kind of becoming a bottleneck? These are questions that we ask by studying, and this is part of our consulting kind of stuff. So organization stuff, organizational agility is measured there. But also interestingly, we can do some kind of ethnographic study here, because what we've discovered is that companies that have a culture of agility are the ones that are actually able to respond and survive and thrive in an age of turbulence. And so how do you develop that culture? Can you go and study people? Can you go and study processes? Are there some kind of mindsets that we need to change here? These are questions that come up in the culture part of it. So you see that what we try to do, what we should try to do in a strategic kind of way, is to develop a culture within the organization where people, processes, and the overall environment, ethos within the organization is oriented toward agility. And here's a thing from one of our consulting efforts. Here's how we will actually do the mapping. Okay. So here's we develop a strategy. So the blue thing here is what is called the map, right? We've got the executives to work on an exercise, and they've developed what they see as being needed in terms of agilities in this particular environment. And the red is what they have assessed and found that this is where they stand in terms of agility. So then our strategy sessions become, how do we get from the red to the blue? Okay. And you will see sometimes they're overinvested. So for instance, they're doing too much in terms of visionary kind of thinking, which means they're trying to look forward. And if you, my books will tell you more about these, what the pitfalls of all the agilities are. If you overdevelop some agilities, you can get stuck in some kinds of thinking. If you're over analyzing, for instance, you can become what is locked into what we call analysis paralysis, right? You're only trying to solve the problem, but not do anything about it, right? So this is just to give you a glimpse of how this works in practice, that we can actually think about agilities mapping for each company and say, okay, where do we have, what kinds of agilities do we have? Where are the gaps? So for instance, here there's a gap. So there's much more inventive agility needed, but we don't have that much. So how do we improve this? How do we address this particular gap? Or how do we build on the strength? It's becoming a bit too much. Maybe you should reduce it. So those kinds of things are what come out of this consulting kind of sessions. Okay. So summing up, about time to sum up here. So the summing up is basically, just to recap, there are 5 different agilities: analytical, operational, inventive, communicative, and visionary. And what I say is that you can think of this as a palette, that you can, if these are the 4 different kinds of agilities, which will give you a response in a real time to something that's reactive, where you need to be reactive. The visionary is what gives you the ability to be strategic about that. So you take the 4 primary agilities and mix them with the visionary agilities, just like you mix primary colors to get any kind of color with a medium of water or oil. And then the 5 agility strategy actually works through mapping, assessing, strategizing, and testing. And this is the book in case you want to read more. But of course, we're open for you to come through master classes that we will be doing occasionally, some workshops that we will be running, and also some executive education programs that we will be doing. So look forward to being involved with you in many ways. And I'll I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Tori to continue there.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Baba. I know everyone is very eager to get to the question and answer session, and you can start posting your questions in the Q&A. In the meantime, for just a couple of minutes, I'd like to just take a quick poll that I hope you can see now. I will post this right now. So we'll take a couple minutes here. The The first question is that Baba will be teaching a class called Effective and Ethical AI, Integrating Technology and People Strategies. It will meet twice a week for 1.5 hours starting on March 17th, and it's going to cost $1,800, which is the early bird price. How likely would you be to enroll in this course if you were given an additional 10% off for attending today's masterclass? Very likely, likely, neither unlikely nor likely or unlikely, unlikely and very unlikely. The second question is that Ryan McManus will be teaching a class called AI Business and Leadership. It too will meet twice a week for 1.5 hours each time, starting on February 25th. It costs $2,000. How likely would you be to enroll in this course if you were given an additional 10% off for attending today's masterclass? Again, the options are very likely, likely, neither likely nor unlikely, unlikely, or very unlikely. You take a couple more minutes, a couple more seconds to do that. And let's just count down from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're going to end the poll. And we're going to turn to the questions and answers. And I see already several great questions have come in. So Baba, for our first question, how does visionary agility connect back to the present? What separates it as an agility versus it being considered a perspective analysis?
Yeah, very good question. Visionary agility is actually a bit of a temper. It tempers the ability, the temptation to react. So we might have a gamut of options in front of us, but what it does is it makes us think about the future and think about not just beyond the us, not just the present time, but also about us. Who is it benefiting? What kinds of people are being impacted by this? It might be very good right now, but in the long run, it may not be. So, for instance, it's not always a negative kind of thing, but it makes us think about how we can effectively address this agility. So that's the key thing about visionary agility. It's not a prospecting thing in that sense, because it is allowing us to think about multiple futures, right? So what would happen if we do this? It makes us ask that question, and that's where we start to see some kind of different kinds of things that we didn't think come out when we start asking that question. That's where the visionary agility's power is, that it makes us think beyond the now, which is very, very, prevalent in today's companies, that we think there's something happening and we need to react to that, and we jump in and do something without giving it thought for the future impact of what would happen if we do that. And in the book, I have a very classic example of how actually very beneficial projects like the Green Revolution, which took place primarily to solve the world's hunger problem, created a lot of problems down the road because they relied too much on groundwater, and then the groundwater just got depleted. So they didn't think of that when they were implementing. So these are the kinds of things that will make you think about the future and see how you can respond to that.
Here's another great question, Baba. How do you balance the strong tendency for operational people to run consistent processes that don't change?
Yeah, this is where, I mean, we need to have a lot of education within the organization. We need to be bringing in much more, holistic kind of thinking. That's where, for instance, emotional intelligence comes in. So, interestingly, this whole framework, and I haven't mentioned it here, comes from human intelligence, because I was looking for a kind of thinking that comes a model that would tell us more about agility. And when I thought about nothing greater than the human mind and the intelligence that we humans have, that has allowed us to adapt and be able to survive very, very dire circumstances, either in terms of environments or in terms of our own personal circumstances. So I developed this whole thing around that. And if any of you are familiar, There's a huge multiple intelligences model that comes out of Harvard and many other researchers. So I drew from that, and that's how this multiple agilities model comes in. So it's very important for us to think about being more holistic, and it is a matter of education within organizations to move away from the operational kind of mindset.
Baba, among the 5 agilities you've discussed, is there one that stands out as being the most important?
Yeah, as I said, we can be very reactive and survive in the short run. But then if we don't think about the long term, which is why I think that the visionary intelligence, visionary agility is very, very important. In fact, I see it as the medium with which you would make this strategy map really work. You would have to mix these 4 agilities, whichever quantity, however you want to mix them, with visionary agility all the time. So in some sense, visionary agility is very, very important.
Do you have any tips for starting this conversation at different organizations?
Yeah, just to have a story, like I told you, the Nokia story. There are so many cases that you can pick up and say, just agility is not enough. And so just one kind of agility is not enough. So how do we develop different kinds of agilities? How do we think about agility in a more holistic sense? This is the kind of thing that you would need to, start conversations rolling about.
Do you have advice for how higher education can stay nimble in the current political environment?
Very interestingly, when I once consulted with Duke about this and developed a framework for how you would actually develop agilities within the organization, right from thinking, in terms of the processes within the company, within the educational university, for instance, to thinking about how people are actually being funded for research, what kinds of, processes exist right now for them to be flexible in terms of teaching. How do you bring different kinds of technologies into teaching? So all these are different ways to think about agilities within educational institutions, and that's a whole big um, ball game there. Then we can touch. It's like you can touch every point of the educational institution, and you can find that you can bring in agility into that organization.
Baba, it takes time to build an agility. If there's a crisis and there isn't enough time, how do you develop the required agility quickly?
That's a wonderful, wonderful question. Okay. Yeah, it does take time and resources to build an agility, and you'd find you don't have it, then what do you do? And I say that you don't need to build that agility within the organization. You can always, there's such a thing called outsourcing. Okay? And many companies, right from when people may remember that Tylenol went through a huge crisis when it used to be available in capsule format in the 80s, and some weirdo started putting poison into it in Chicago stores, and many people died. And then all of Tylenol was kind of the Tylenol Johnson and Johnson was tainted as being bad in its manufacturing processes. And then they hired a communication firm to build a public relations exercise, and they overcame the brand image because that was not true. There's some guy who had done it, and nothing wrong with their manufacturing process. So they used this marketing company, the personal relations company, to actually improve their brand image. And again, that kind of stuff can be done. You don't have the ability to do something in terms of a market research, which is very essential for you to do. Hire somebody else. So you can always think of outsourcing and getting that temporarily into the organization and be. So in fact, a whole new idea is emerging as we speak, that there is this concept called a networked organization, where the organization itself, the company, individual company itself, does something that's core, but it has a bunch of partners on which it can call willy-nilly as it depends, as the situation demands. So this is where you actually think about, building a conglomerate around you and working with that. So you can overcome the problem of time and resources by actually having a bunch of people, a bunch of companies, partner companies, to which you can go to whenever you necessary.
And this is a related question. In healthcare, because of the pandemic, we were forced to become nimble quickly. Now we're slipping back. How do you maintain the agility?
Yeah, so there is a very interesting thing that, how do firefighters and how do police actually be nimble, because they have to respond to different situations, and they go through exercises and create artificial crises. So can you create artificial crises in your health organization? Can you create some kind of simulations and mimic those things? And that's how you develop those agilities. So, and then you will also get to know that this is where you're weak and this is where you're strong in terms of the agilities. And so this is a standard way in many crisis response organizations, and perhaps you could bring that into your company to do that.
When resources are strapped, how do you decide which agilities your organization should develop?
Interesting question. So, well, I mean, when resources are strapped, you always have to think about, which agility is the one that's going to kill me. So the lack of which will kill me. So you have to identify that. So that's where when the top leadership or the group sits down and thinks about the world outside, and they say this is the agility, the mapping exercise, and the strategy. That's where they decide, okay, this is the one that's most critical, and that's where you will start to say, okay, we have to do something about that. So there is, or what I should say is that there's no template answer to that, but the answer is through actually studying the market and seeing which one is the most critical for you.
How can you use the strategy process in a governmental sector?
Oh, the same way, actually. So this is one of the key things that I found with very powerful about this methodology, that it is industry agnostic. So, and I talk about the government also as an industry. So you can take this framework to any kind of institution and do that. There may be some sluggishness in government, but that's where this will point out the sluggishness, and that's where if there's a willingness to change things, then it offers a great framework for you to start thinking about how to change those processes. So it works equally well in the government, I think. Sorry.
Sorry about that, Baba. What tools can you use to implement the MAST cycle?
So typically what happens is that there are we have a consulting tool and it's proprietary, but companies can develop that very easily by just sitting down maybe every quarter or every 6 months to sit down and go through the environment. And so you can get a retreat in place where you have all the movers and shakers, people who have their ears to the ground, come and sit with you and give you a picture of what the world is as they see it from their thing. So, for instance, when we think about agilities, again, and we say turbulence, the marketing person will see turbulence in a very different way from the operations and productions person. Right? So now you have to put these two together and form that pentagon that we call of the five intelligences or five agilities. And so you talk about you coming together and having a retreat where you can actually do, even if it's an informal kind of discussion, you can map those agilities out that you need. And then you can assess them, taking stock of what you have in an informal kind of way. But of course, there can be much more formal methodologies, which we have. And if you read the book, you will find there are some there.
And I think we have time for one more question, Baba. How would you relate nimble strategy to Bitcoin acquisition?
It is also nimble strategy to Bitcoin as acquisition. First thing I think we have to examine, step back a bit and examine whether Bitcoin is a flash in the pan or it's a here to stay. And then you say, okay, these are the kinds of things that you might invest in right now, but will it be worthwhile in the future? Okay, how volatile is this market? And if you're exposing yourself to an extreme volatility, maybe it's not a wise thing to be doing that. So maybe hedge your bets by putting a little bit of money there, putting a little bit of resources in there, and not extending yourself in that sense. So one of the key things that I talk about when I say nimble strategy is that imagine that you're walking on ice. You don't know how thick the ice is. So you take your steps gingerly and then you stride. Okay, so you have to be constantly making these small steps so that you don't fall into thin ice, but fall through thin ice, but be making those steps, so that you're not, left behind. So you have to. This is a key thing that, and there's a very interesting methodology that comes out from finance, which is called real options thing, where you actually think of investments as being options. So you don't invest everything, but you make a small bet and see if that's working, then you start off doing more of the same. So this is how I would think of in a nimble strategy for Bitcoin.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of our hour. I would really like to thank you, Baba, so much for such an engaging presentation. I'd like to thank all of our audience members as well. And I would like to bring your attention. I don't know that the screen that slide came up, but we will be having another presentation on March 13th with Tom Davenport. He'll be speaking about AI in healthcare, risks and opportunities, and I hope you can join us then, as well as check out our website for all our upcoming programs, including Baba's class. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.